Mark Johnson, known to millions as the Titan, stood at the absolute peak of his wrestling career. He wasn't just a wrestler. He was a force of nature, a mountain of muscle and raw power who had dominated the WWE for years. His recent championship victory had cemented his legend. A brutal 20-minute war that saw him overcome impossible odds, proving once again why he was called the Titan. Fans adored him, not just for his incredible strength and acrobatic feats that defied his size, but for his sheer resilience. He was the kind of guy who could take a beating, get back up, and still deliver the knockout blow. People talked about his physical prowess like it was something from a comic book. He was the undisputed champion, a household name, and everywhere he went, crowds roared. His face was on merchandise, his signature moves were mimicked in schoolyards, and his story was an inspiration. He was the picture of health, a warrior, seemingly invincible. Tonight was no different. The air in the massive arena, packed to the rafters with over 15,000 screaming fans in a major U.S. city, vibrated with an electric energy. This wasn't just any match. It was the main event. The rematch everyone had been waiting for. The Titan was set to defend his title against his fiercest rival, a young, hungry challenger named Vector, who was known for his speed and unpredictable style. The stakes were incredibly high. Vector had come close to beating the Titan before, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every seat was filled. Every eye was on the entrance ramp, waiting for the champions to emerge. The lights dimmed, spotlights cut through the darkness, and the roar grew deafening as the Titan's entrance music blared through the speakers. He walked out, a confident smirk on his face, soaking in the adulation, his championship belt gleaming under the arena lights. Vector followed, equally confident, and the crowd was split, a sea of cheers and boos that only added to the drama. This was going to be a classic. The bell rang, and the match exploded into action. Right from the start, it was a brutal, back-and-forth battle. The Titan used his raw power, slamming Vector into the mat, tossing him around like a rag doll. Vector, quick and agile, dodged and weaved, landing quick strikes, trying to wear down the champion. They traded blows, exchanged holds, each trying to gain the upper hand. The Titan executed his signature moves with his usual precision and power. He launched himself off the ropes, delivering a thunderous clothesline that sent Vector sprawling. He hoisted Vector onto his shoulders for a devastating powerbomb, and the crowd collectively gasped. He was putting on a show, just as he always did, showcasing the incredible strength and endurance that had made him a legend. But as the match wore on, a subtle change started to become noticeable, at least to a very keen eye. After a particularly demanding sequence where he had lifted Vector high for a suplex, the Titan seemed to hesitate for a split second before dropping him. He shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if clearing cobwebs. It was a fleeting moment, easily dismissed as normal match exertion, the kind of brief fatigue that even the most conditioned athletes experience in a high-stakes fight. He took a few deep breaths, maybe a little deeper than usual, and rubbed his temple for a moment. He quickly regained his composure, throwing another forceful punch, but the slight pause, the brief look of something akin to discomfort, was there. He pushed through it, as he always did, his warrior's spirit taking over. The crowd wouldn't have noticed, too caught up in the spectacle. But for a moment, the Titan, the invincible champion, looked just a tiny bit off his game. He continued to fight, pushing his body to its limits. But that brief, almost invisible falter hinted that something beneath the surface might not be quite right. He delivered a series of powerful chops to Vector's chest, the sound echoing through the arena. but his movements seemed a fraction of a second slower, his usual explosive force tempered by an uncharacteristic strain. He ignored it, focusing on the win, on defending his title, on being the legend everyone expected him to be. The match continued its relentless pace, each man giving everything they had, the championship hanging in the balance. The match roared on, each move more intense than the last, building to a fever pitch. The Titan, despite that brief moment of discomfort, pushed himself harder, determined to finish Vector. He climbed to the top rope, a place he rarely went, signaling his intent to deliver a crushing, match-ending dive. The crowd rose to its feet, a collective gasp and cheer filling the arena. He launched himself, a massive figure flying through the air, aiming for Vector, who was prone on the mat. He landed with a sickening thud, the impact shaking the ring. It was his signature diving elbow drop, a move designed to incapacitate any opponent. He rolled off Vector, a triumphant roar ready to escape his lips. But it never came. Instead, he faltered, scrambling to his feet with an odd, jerky motion. He stood there for a moment, swaying, his eyes wide and unfocused. The referee, moving in to count the pin, paused, noticing the champion's strange behavior. The Titan put a hand to his head, shaking it again, more violently this time, as if trying to clear a persistent fog. His legs seemed to buckle slightly under him, and he took a step back, bumping into the ropes. There was a visible change in his demeanor. The fierce, focused warrior was gone, replaced by someone confused, disoriented, lost. Vector, still groggy from the elbow drop, slowly started to stir. He pushed himself up, looking at the Titan with a mix of surprise and concern. The referee, now genuinely worried, waved off the pin attempt and moved closer to the champion, asking if he was okay. The Titan didn't answer. He just stared blankly ahead, his breathing becoming shallow and quick. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His massive frame, usually so imposing, seemed to shrink, to lose its power. Then, without warning, it happened. The Titan's knees buckled completely. He didn't just fall, he collapsed. His body hit the canvas with a heavy, lifeless sound that echoed through the stunned arena. He lay there, motionless, in the center of the ring, his eyes still open, but glazed over. The crowd, which had been buzzing with excitement just moments before, fell into a stunned silence. It was a silence so profound, so sudden, that it felt heavier than any cheer. Vector, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, rushed to the Titan's side, flipping him gently onto his back. He immediately started checking for a pulse, his face etched with panic. The referee, his whistle still clutched in his hand, blew it repeatedly, a piercing sound that cut through the silence. He frantically waved his arms, signaling for immediate medical attention. The commentators, usually so boisterous, were speechless. "Oh my God!" One of them finally managed to choke out, his voice trembling. "The Titan is down. He's not moving." The initial disbelief quickly turned into confusion, then into a growing murmur of concern that spread like wildfire through the crowd. People in the front rows were standing, leaning over the barricades, trying to get a better look. On the giant screens above the ring, the replay showed the Titan's sudden, inexplicable collapse in agonizing slow motion. It wasn't a selling job, not part of the show. This was real. Security personnel, along with several WWE officials, sprinted from backstage, their faces grim. They clambered over the barricade, some sliding under the bottom rope, others vaulting over the top. The ring filled quickly with concerned individuals, all converging on the fallen champion. A few officials tried to clear a path, pushing back Vector and the referee, who were still hovering over the Titan. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, turning into a worried buzz. Some people were shouting, "Is he okay? What happened?" The panic was palpable, thick in the air. This wasn't just a wrestler going down for a count. This was something far more serious. The sheer size and power of the Titan made his sudden stillness even more terrifying. He was a force of nature, a seemingly indestructible machine, and now he lay inert. The seriousness of the situation became clearer with each passing second. No one was trying to continue the match. No one was thinking about the championship. All eyes were on the unresponsive figure in the middle of the ring, and the growing crowd of people trying to help him. The arena, usually a place of joyous noise and spectacle, was now a cauldron of fear and uncertainty. The hope that this was just part of the show, a dramatic twist, quickly faded as the frantic energy of the officials and the referee's desperate signals made it clear this was a genuine crisis. The silence was broken only by the urgent whispers of the officials and the rising anxiety of the thousands of fans watching in horror. The arena lights, usually so bright and focused on the spectacle, now seemed harsh and revealing, highlighting the pale, still form of the Titan. Within what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute, the first wave of medical personnel arrived. 2 paramedics, identifiable by their uniforms and equipment bags, scrambled into the ring. They moved with a practiced urgency, but their faces showed the strain of the unexpected situation. One immediately dropped to his knees beside the Titan, fumbling for a stethoscope, while the other quickly started cutting away the fabric of his wrestling gear to get access to his chest. The scene became a whirlwind of focused activity. Wires were attached, monitors were deployed, and the rhythmic beeping of an EKG machine soon cut through the tense silence, a sound that offered little comfort. One paramedic was talking rapidly into a radio, his voice strained, relaying vitals that clearly weren't good. The other, after a quick assessment, began to administer oxygen through a mask, his brow furrowed in concentration. They worked with a desperate efficiency, trying to stabilize the massive man. But there was a noticeable struggle. Their movements, initially confident, grew more hesitant. They conferred in low, urgent tones, their eyes darting between the Titan and their equipment, which didn't seem to be showing the improvements they expected. The Titan's breathing remained shallow, almost imperceptible, and his pulse, when they found it, was weak and thready. They tried different approaches, adjusting the oxygen mask, checking his pupils again, running through a mental checklist of emergency protocols. But nothing seemed to make a significant difference. A growing sense of frustration and bewilderment began to show on their faces. They were highly trained professionals, but this situation wasn't following the textbook. They were clearly hitting a wall, and the seconds were ticking by, each one feeling like an hour. Meanwhile, amidst the chaos and the focused panic around the ring, a figure moved quietly in the background. Arthur, a man of about 60, with a neat, graying mustache and a slight stoop from years of pushing heavy carts, had been performing his nightly duties. He was the arena's head janitor, a familiar, unassuming presence who usually worked unnoticed, cleaning up the aftermath of cheering crowds. Tonight, however, his routine was completely shattered. He had been sweeping near an exit ramp when the roar of the crowd had suddenly died, replaced by that chilling silence. His broom was now propped against a wall, forgotten. Arthur watched the unfolding drama from a respectful distance, leaning against a concession stand that was now deserted. He was just another face in the blur of concerned onlookers, his presence completely unremarkable to anyone caught up in the immediate emergency. He had seen countless matches, countless celebrations, and even a few minor injuries, but never anything like this. This was different. This was serious. He had a unique perspective, a quiet vantage point away from the immediate huddle of officials and paramedics. His eyes, though older, were sharp, accustomed to noticing details others missed. A discarded ticket, a loose screw, a stain on the floor. Now, he applied that same observational skill to the scene in the ring. He saw the paramedics' movements, their expressions, the way the Titan's chest barely rose and fell. As he watched, a familiar unease began to settle over him. It wasn't the general worry of a fan, it was something deeper, something that pricked at old memories. Arthur hadn't always been a janitor. Decades ago, he had served as a combat medic in the Army. He'd seen his share of medical emergencies, often in far less controlled environments. He'd learned to read the subtle signs of trauma, the quiet language of a body in distress. He remembered a specific type of situation, a particular kind of collapse that often baffled less experienced medics. He saw the paramedics struggling, their efforts not yielding the expected results. He saw their growing confusion. He noticed the slight, almost imperceptible, rigidity in the Titan's neck, the way his jaw seemed a little too tight, the subtle angle of his head. These were tiny things, easily missed in the urgency of the moment, especially if one was focused on the obvious vital signs. A flicker of recognition sparked in Arthur's mind. He started piecing together the subtle clues. The suddenness of the collapse, the lack of immediate response to standard treatment, the way the Titan was positioned. It all clicked into place, a pattern from his distant past. He'd seen this before. He knew what it looked like, and more importantly, he knew what needed to be done. An internal conflict began to brew within him. He was just Arthur, the janitor. Who was he to question trained paramedics? They were professionals, with advanced equipment and up-to-date training. He was an old man with old knowledge. Would they even listen to him? Would he just be getting in the way? The thought of stepping forward, of interrupting the medical team, felt audacious, almost disrespectful. But then he looked at the Titan again, so still, so vulnerable, and he saw the growing panic in the paramedic's eyes. He saw the fear spreading through the crowd. He felt the heavy weight of urgency. His old training, instincts honed in life-or-death situations, screamed at him. He knew what he was seeing. He knew what was happening, and he knew, with a certainty that transcended his humble position, that time was running out. The memory of those past moments, of lives saved and lives lost, surged through him, pushing aside his hesitation. He couldn't just stand there and watch. He had to do something. The situation in the ring was getting noticeably worse. Mark, the Titan, lay there, his breathing now so shallow it was almost invisible. The small, almost imperceptible movements of his chest had nearly stopped. The paramedics, their faces grim, exchanged worried glances. One of them checked his pulse again, then shook his head, a clear sign of distress. They were talking quickly, their voices low, but Arthur could see the frustration in their movements, the way they fumbled slightly with their equipment. Their usual calm, professional demeanor was cracking. They had tried standard protocols, administered what they thought was necessary, but nothing was working. In fact, it looked like Mark was getting worse, not better. A desperate voice from the crowd yelled, "Do something! His heart!" Another shouted, "He's not breathing!" The tension was a living thing, pressing down on everyone, thick and suffocating. The arena, moments ago, a roaring cauldron of excitement, was now a place of silent, terrified helplessness, punctuated by scattered cries of fear. It was a terrible sound, the sound of thousands of people realizing something truly bad was happening right in front of them. The paramedics were visibly stressed, their movements becoming more frantic, less precise. They were losing control, and more importantly, they were losing Mark. Arthur couldn't stand it anymore. The internal debate he'd been having with himself vanished. The vision of Mark lying there, so still, combined with the paramedic's obvious struggle, pushed him over the edge. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to act. He took a deep breath, a decision firm in his mind. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a medic, and someone's life was on the line. He started moving, a quiet determination in his stride. He walked purposefully, past the rows of stunned fans, towards the ring. A security guard, focused on keeping the perimeter clear, put out an arm to stop him. "Sir, you can't go there," the guard said, his voice firm but distracted. Arthur didn't stop. He gently but firmly pushed the guard's arm aside, his gaze fixed on the ring. "I have to," he muttered, his voice low but unwavering. The guard, surprised by the older man's sudden force and conviction, hesitated for a crucial second, and Arthur slipped past him. He reached the edge of the ring and, without thinking, climbed onto the apron. He was an old man, not nimble, but the adrenaline flowing through him gave him strength. He practically tumbled into the ring, landing a bit awkwardly, but quickly righting himself. The paramedics, startled, looked up. One of them, a young woman with wide, panicked eyes, snapped, "Sir, you need to get out of the ring. This is a medical emergency." Arthur ignored her, his eyes on Mark. He knelt beside the prone wrestler, his movements surprisingly quick for his age. "You're doing it wrong," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "You're missing something." The lead paramedic, a burly man who looked like he'd seen it all, glared at him. "Who are you? We're professionals here. Get out of the way before you make things worse." He tried to push Arthur back, but Arthur stood his ground. "I was a combat medic," Arthur said, his voice gaining authority. "Army. Decades of experience. I've seen this before. It's not a heart attack. It's a vagal response, complicated by a specific kind of nerve compression. His neck, his jaw. He's seizing, but not in the way you're looking for. You need to release the pressure." The paramedics looked at each other, confusion warring with skepticism. A janitor? Telling them how to do their job? It was unheard of. But then the younger paramedic, the one who had initially spoken to him, looked at Mark again. His breathing was almost non-existent. Their treatments had failed. Desperation was a powerful motivator. "What do you suggest?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, a hint of doubt still in her eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. Arthur didn't waste another second. He pointed to Mark's head. "His head is angled, putting pressure on the carotid and vagus nerves. You're trying to force air, but the pathway is constricted. He needs a specific maneuver to release that pressure. It's an old army trick, simple but effective when it's this specific type of event." He explained quickly, his words clear and precise. "You need to gently but firmly extend his neck, just so, and apply a very slight counter-rotational pressure to his jaw, while simultaneously opening his airway by lifting his chin. It's about releasing the nerve, not just opening the airway. If you just lift the chin, it's not enough for this." He demonstrated the motion with his own hands, keeping them away from Mark, but showing the exact angle and pressure points. "One of you needs to hold his head steady. The other needs to do the jaw. It needs to be gentle, but firm and precise. It's not about brute force, it's about the right angle. The burly paramedic scoffed. That's not in any textbook I've ever read. Textbooks don't cover everything, Arthur shot back, his eyes locked on Mark. I've seen it save lives when everything else failed. It's about understanding the body's mechanics, not just the symptoms. His body is protecting itself by clamping down, but it's also suffocating him. The younger paramedic looked at the lead one, then back at Arthur. Mark was dying. They had exhausted their options. What did they have to lose? Let's try it, she said, her voice firm. We're losing him anyway. The lead paramedic hesitated for a moment longer. Then, seeing the absolute certainty in Arthur's eyes and the dire state of Mark, nodded grimly. All right, he said, his voice laced with a reluctant desperation. You! Help me! You? He pointed at Arthur. Talk us through it. Exactly what you said. They positioned themselves, one gently stabilizing Mark's head, the other ready to perform the jaw maneuver. Arthur leaned in, guiding their hands with his voice, his own hands hovering, ready to intervene if needed. Now, he instructed. Gentle extension, easy, just a slight tilt, and then the jaw, lift and slightly rotate there. Hold it. The paramedics, a mix of doubt and desperate hope on their faces, followed Arthur's precise instructions. The one holding Mark's head extended his neck. A slow, careful movement. The other, the younger paramedic, applied the slight counter-rotational pressure to Mark's jaw, then gently lifted his chin. It was a subtle adjustment, not forceful or dramatic, but held with steady intent. For a beat, nothing happened. The arena remained hushed. The collective breath of thousands held tight. The medical team watched Mark, then Arthur, then Mark again, their expressions taut with anxiety. Then a flicker. A shallow, ragged gasp escaped Mark's lips. It was barely audible over the general hum of the arena, but to those huddled around him, it was like a thunderclap. His chest, which had been frighteningly still, rose and fell, a little more deeply this time. A second gasp followed, a little stronger, more rhythmic. The monitors, which had been flatlining or showing alarmingly low numbers, began to beep erratically, then slowly settled into a more consistent rhythm. His heart rate, still weak, started to climb back up, inch by agonizing inch. A collective sigh of relief swept through the small group in the ring. The lead paramedic, who had been so skeptical, let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The younger paramedic's eyes, wide with concentration just moments before, now brimmed with tears of relief. Mark's face, which had been a ghastly pale, seemed to gain a tiny bit of color. His eyelids fluttered. A low groan, distinctly human and not just a reflex, escaped him. It was a sound that, moments ago, they hadn't dared to hope for. He's breathing, the younger paramedic whispered, her voice cracking. He's really breathing. Arthur, who had been leaning over them, his gaze fixed on Mark, straightened up slowly. His face, etched with tension, softened slightly. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Keep him stable, he said, his voice quiet but firm. The pressure's released. Now you can work. The medical team, energized by the sudden turnaround, sprang into action. They quickly rechecked their equipment, now finding positive responses where there had been none. They administered oxygen, monitored his vitals with renewed purpose, and prepared him for transport. The initial chaos and frustration had given way to focused, efficient work. There was an unspoken acknowledgement in their hurried movements, a silent gratitude towards the quiet janitor who had just shown them something entirely new. The lead paramedic, still a bit stunned, looked at Arthur. Thank you, he mouthed, his voice hoarse, a genuine awe in his eyes. Arthur simply nodded again, already starting to step back, to fade into the background. Outside the ring, the crowd had been a sea of hushed fear. Now, as the first clear signs of Mark's recovery became visible, the sustained breathing, the renewed activity of the medical team, a murmur began to ripple through the stands. It started as a low hum, then swelled into a wave of relief. People began to openly weep, wiping away tears they hadn't even realized they were shedding. Then a few claps started, tentative at first, then growing in strength, until the entire arena erupted in a cacophony of cheers and applause. It wasn't the roaring ovation for a victorious match, but a heartfelt, emotional outpouring for a life saved. The crowd didn't fully understand what had happened. They just knew that the man who had been dying was now breathing again. They saw the medical team working with renewed urgency, and they saw a figure, an older man in a janitor's uniform, quietly stepping away from the center of the action. He hadn't been in the spotlight before, but now many eyes were on him. There were shouts of, "Who was that?" and "He saved him." But Arthur, true to his nature, didn't linger. As the medical stretcher was carefully brought into the ring, Arthur began to make his way through the ropes, his movements calm and unhurried. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the cheers directed his way. His focus was solely on getting out of the ring, leaving the professionals to do their work. He saw Mark being gently secured onto the stretcher, his breathing now steady, though still shallow. The color in his face was slowly returning, a hopeful sign. The medical team, now moving with a clear purpose, lifted the stretcher. As they began to carry Mark out of the ring, down the ramp, and towards the waiting ambulance, the cheers intensified. Flashbulbs from phones and cameras lit up the arena, capturing every moment of the dramatic rescue. Arthur, meanwhile, had slipped through a side exit, disappearing back into the labyrinthine corridors of the arena, a silent shadow retreating from the sudden glare of public attention. He had done what he felt he had to do, and now his job was finished. The focus, as it should be, was on Mark, the superstar, whose life had just been pulled back from the brink. The quiet janitor, the unexpected hero, was content to let it be that way. The ambulance, sirens wailing, sped through the city streets carrying Mark the Titan Johnson to the nearest major hospital. Inside, paramedics continued to monitor his vitals, their earlier panic replaced by a focused determination to ensure his stability. Doctors were on standby, alerted to a rare and critical case. Initial reports from the arena described a sudden, unexplained collapse, followed by a dramatic recovery thanks to an unconventional intervention. Once at the hospital, Mark was immediately rushed into emergency. A team of specialists, including neurologists and cardiologists, began a battery of tests. Hours later, the preliminary diagnosis came in. It wasn't a heart attack, nor a stroke, but a severe case of vagal syncope, exacerbated by extreme physical exertion and possibly a pre-existing, undiagnosed condition. His vagus nerve had reacted drastically, causing a sudden drop in heart rate and blood pressure, leading to the collapse. The doctors confirmed that without the quick, precise manipulation Arthur had performed, Mark could have suffered severe brain damage due to prolonged lack of oxygen, or even worse, his heart might have stopped entirely. Arthur's intervention, seemingly simple, had been absolutely crucial. Meanwhile, news of the dramatic rescue had already begun to spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with grainy phone footage of Mark collapsing, the frantic efforts of the paramedics, and then the image of an older man in a janitor's uniform leaning over him, seemingly performing a miracle. Sports news outlets, initially reporting on the shocking collapse, quickly shifted their focus to the unexpected hero. WWE superstar saved by mystery janitor, screamed headlines. Old Army trick revives the Titan. The story had all the ingredients of a modern legend, and the media scrambled to piece together the details. Who was this janitor? What was this old Army trick? Every major network sent reporters to the arena, trying to find anyone who knew anything about the man named Arthur. Arthur, however, was nowhere to be found. After slipping away from the arena, he had gone home, changed out of his uniform, and tried to resume his quiet life. He made himself a simple dinner, watched a bit of TV, and tried to ignore the buzzing of his phone, which had suddenly started receiving calls from unknown numbers. His small apartment, usually a haven of peace, now felt like it was humming with an unfamiliar energy. He knew I had done something important, but the idea of being a hero felt foreign and uncomfortable. He was just a man who saw a problem and knew how to fix it. His military training had taught him to act, not to seek praise. He had seen enough chaos in his life to prefer quiet, but the world wouldn't let him stay quiet for long. The WWE organization, after confirming the doctor's assessment and the vital role of the janitor, issued a public statement. They praised Arthur's quick thinking and bravery, acknowledging that his intervention had saved their superstar's life. They promised to find him and honor him appropriately. This public acknowledgement only fueled the media frenzy. Reporters staked out the arena, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. His colleagues, initially unaware of the full extent of his actions, were now beaming with pride. "That's Arthur!" they'd tell anyone who asked, pointing to blurry screenshots of the janitor in the ring. He always was a quiet one, but sharp. His family, too, was caught off guard. His estranged daughter, who hadn't spoken to him in years, saw his face on the news and called him, her voice a mix of shock and pride. His few friends, mostly other unassuming workers, urged him to embrace the recognition. "You saved a life, Arthur. That's a big deal," they told him. But he just grunted in response, still uncomfortable with the spotlight. He felt a deep satisfaction in knowing he had helped, but the idea of being paraded around, interviewed, and celebrated felt like a distraction from the simple, honest work he valued. He was a janitor, not a celebrity. The thought of all those cameras, all those questions, made him want to retreat further into his shell. He just wanted things to go back to normal, but he knew, deep down, that they wouldn't. His quiet act of heroism had irrevocably changed, not just Mark the Titan Johnson's life, but his own as well. The world wanted to know the janitor who saved the superstar, and Arthur, despite his reluctance, was about to become a household name. The Titan, Mark Johnson, lay in his hospital bed, the memory of the arena a blur, a jumble of bright lights and roaring sounds that faded into darkness. He remembered the pain, a sudden sharp twist in his chest, then nothing. When he woke, disoriented but alive, the doctors were quick to explain what had happened. A rare physiological response, a specific nerve compression that had mimicked a heart attack, but wasn't. And then they told him about Arthur, the janitor, the old army trick. Mark listened, his mind slowly piecing together the incredible story. He owed his life to a man he didn't even know, a man who had seen what others missed and acted when it mattered most. His recovery was swift, fueled by a powerful desire to thank the man who had saved him. From his hospital room, Mark made a public statement, his voice hoarse but clear. He credited Arthur, the humble janitor, with saving his life. "He saw something no one else did," Mark said to the cameras, "and he had the courage to step in, Without him, I wouldn't be here. He's a hero, plain and simple. Mark detailed his own experience of the collapse, the slow return to consciousness, the confusion, and then the overwhelming gratitude. He remembered waking up to the familiar hospital ceiling, the strange feeling of tubes in his nose, and the worried faces of his family. The doctors explained the specifics of his condition, the nerve, the pressure, the way it had caused his body to shut down. They also explained that without Arthur's quick and accurate intervention, the outcome would have been dire. Brain damage, they said, was almost certain. Death, a very real possibility. Mark felt a chill run down his spine every time he thought about it. The meeting between Mark and Arthur was arranged a few days later, once Mark was strong enough to receive visitors. It was a private affair, away from the prying eyes of the media, in a quiet room at the hospital. Mark, still a bit pale, sat upright in his bed. Arthur, dressed in clean, simple clothes, looked uncomfortable, almost out of place in the sterile environment. He shuffled his feet, his gaze directed at the floor. Mark extended a hand. "Arthur," he said, his voice filled with genuine emotion. "Thank you. You saved my life." Arthur finally looked up, his eyes meeting Mark's. "Just doing my job, sir," he mumbled, shaking Mark's hand firmly. "Saw something that needed fixing." Mark just smiled. "Some job. You did more than fix something, Arthur. You brought me back." He then offered Arthur a substantial reward, a sum that would change Arthur's life forever. "And a lifelong offer of support," Mark added. "Anything you ever need, Arthur, just ask." Arthur, though visibly surprised by the offer, maintained his humble demeanor. He accepted the gesture with quiet dignity, but emphasized his duty. "I just did what anyone with the right knowledge would have done," he insisted, his voice softer now. "It was instinct." Mark knew it was more than instinct. It was courage, experience, and a willingness to act when others were paralyzed by fear and confusion. Arthur's story, once confined to the whispers of arena staff, now resonated across the nation. His quiet heroism became a celebrated narrative, inspiring countless people. It highlighted the importance of overlooked individuals, the everyday heroes who often go unnoticed. Media outlets, initially focused on the sensationalism, began to pivot, showcasing Arthur's grounded perspective. He found himself, much to his discomfort, being interviewed on national television. He used these unexpected platforms not to boast, but to advocate for better training and recognition for support staff in all fields. He spoke about the value of practical knowledge, the kind gained through experience, often outside traditional academic paths. He emphasized that expertise could come from unexpected places, and that listening to all voices, regardless of their position, could be life-saving. He became a symbol, not of celebrity, but of quiet competence and selfless action. People wrote letters to him, thanking him for his example. Children drew pictures of him, depicting him as a superhero. He was invited to speak at local schools, where he shared stories from his military days, always linking them back to the importance of observation, quick thinking, and helping others. Arthur, the humble janitor, had reluctantly become a public figure, but he used his newfound recognition for good. He never forgot his roots, continuing to work part-time at the arena, ensuring that the floors were clean and the seats were ready for the next event. He still preferred the quiet solitude of his work, but now there was a subtle difference. People greeted him with respect, sometimes even awe. He was no longer just Arthur, the janitor. He was Arthur, the man who saved the Titan. And in his quiet way, he carried that title with grace and a deep sense of purpose. His life, once so predictable, had taken an unexpected turn, proving that even the most ordinary lives could hold extraordinary moments of heroism. The bond forged in a moment of crisis between a superstar and a janitor had become a powerful testament to human connection and unexpected courage. The Titan, Mark Johnson, finally made his emotional return to the WWE ring. The arena was packed, the roar of the crowd deafening, a mix of anticipation and relief filling the air. He walked out to his usual entrance music, but this time, every step felt heavier, more meaningful. He paused at the top of the ramp, looking out at the sea of faces, and a genuine smile spread across his face. He wasn't just Mark Johnson, the wrestler. He was Mark Johnson, the survivor, the man who had faced death and come back stronger. He dedicated his performance that night and every performance after to Arthur, the quiet janitor who had saved his life, and to the medical staff who had worked tirelessly to ensure his full recovery. His story, once a tale of athletic prowess, had now become a profound testament to human fragility and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. He spoke openly about his experience, not shying away from the vulnerability it exposed, but embracing it as a part of his journey. His matches now carried a different weight, a deeper meaning. He fought not just for championships, but as a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, help can come from unexpected places. He was not just a superstar, he was an inspiration. Arthur, for his part, continued his work at the arena, but everything had changed. He still pushed his cleaning cart, still swept the floors, but now he did so with a renewed sense of purpose and an undeniable air of respect surrounding him. He was honored by the WWE organization, not with a trophy or a belt, but with a quiet ceremony where Vince McMahon himself thanked him personally for his bravery and quick thinking. His community, initially just curious, now saw him as a local hero, a man who embodied the best of what people could be. He received a special commendation from the mayor, a small plaque that he kept on his mantelpiece, next to a framed photo of him shaking Mark Johnson's hand. His story had a far-reaching impact beyond just the arena or his local town. That old army trick he used, the simple yet effective maneuver, was now being incorporated into emergency medical training programs across various fields. Paramedic schools began adding modules on identifying specific, subtle physiological cues that might indicate conditions similar to what Mark experienced. Doctors and emergency responders started paying closer attention to non-traditional medical knowledge, acknowledging that sometimes the most effective solutions weren't always found in textbooks. Arthur was invited to speak at these training sessions, not as a medical expert, but as a living example of how observation, experience, and unconventional thinking could save a life. He always stressed the importance of staying calm, of looking beyond the obvious, and of trusting one's instincts when all else seemed to fail. He never claimed to be a doctor, just a man who remembered what he learned and acted on it. The enduring message of this whole incredible event was clear. Heroes can truly come from anywhere. They don't always wear capes or have grand titles. Sometimes they wear janitor uniforms and work quietly in the background. The story highlighted the crucial importance of listening to unexpected voices, especially in moments of crisis. It taught everyone that wisdom and life-saving knowledge aren't exclusive to those with degrees and official certifications. They can reside in the experiences of everyday people, in the lessons learned from different walks of life. The lasting bond between Mark Johnson, the superstar whose life was saved, and Arthur, the humble janitor who saved him, became a powerful narrative. It spoke of gratitude, humility, and the profound connection that can form between people from vastly different worlds when humanity is at its core. Their story was a reminder that every person has value, every life matters, and every voice, no matter how quiet, deserves to be heard. It was a story that continued to inspire, long after the headlines faded, a testament to the fact that courage and compassion are truly universal. The Titan continued to wrestle, a living legend, and Arthur continued his work, a quiet hero, both forever linked by that one extraordinary moment in the ring.